Welcome to Mastering Sales Leadership, the podcast where today's top B2B revenue leaders share how they forecast, grow, and allocate resources in an unpredictable world. Each episode features candid conversations with CROs, sales executives, RevOps leaders, investors, and industry experts who reveal the strategies, frameworks, and lessons behind building high-performance sales organizations. From forecasting, risk, and pipeline quality to leadership, execution, and growth, we explore what actually drives results. Here is your host, Bill Kantor.
Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of Mastering Sales Leadership. My guest today is the former Chief Revenue Officer of ALLPLAN, a global provider of design software for architecture, engineering, and construction professionals, and part of the Nemetschek Group. During his time as CRO, he led 3 major commercial transformations that really reshaped the company's business model, commercial organization, and sales execution. When he's not working, he's an avid runner and strength trainer who believes that many of the same principles that drive success in endurance sports also apply to sales leadership. So with that, everyone, please welcome my guest, Luis Brito. Welcome to the Mastering Sales Leadership podcast, Luis.
Thank you, Bill. Very happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. Thanks for being here as well. So, Luis, today we're going to unpack the 3 different and simultaneous you led at ALLPLAN. And for those, by the way, who will stay until the end, Luis will share the leadership principles that he relies on to influence people and build commitment during periods of significant change, like what you went through at ALLPLAN. So, Luis, why don't you start us out by describing the 3 types of transformation in more detail for our listeners?
Bill, we had 3 simultaneous transformations, really. First, the business model. Second, the commercial organization. And third, the sales model, right? So it all came about by market signals. So if you had walked into ALLPLAN before the transformation, you would found essentially an outstanding engineering company with a long, proud history in ACO software, really one of the pioneers, with great products, highly talented people, loyal customers, commercially still operating with a model that had served the business for decades, but the market had fundamentally changed. So customers were looking for flexibility versus perpetual large upfront investments. They also expected continuous innovation rather than release cycles every year or once a year. And they also expected more of an ongoing partnership rather than a purely transactional relationship. So when we were looking at that, we look at that as a turning point. Also understanding that the market had largely moved towards that business model as well. And it required really a reinvention of the commercial engine of the company. And so we looked at these 3 interconnected things. So changing the business first, the commercial organization to support that, and the sales model inside the sales organization, inside the commercial organization. So those interconnection is what made the whole thing possible.
So describe those 3 things. What do you mean by those: commercial model, business model, and organization? Describe what you mean by those so people get an understanding of that.
Yeah, so maybe let's start with the business model, right? So why perpetual license to subscription, right? So moving to subscription wasn't really the objective in itself. It was more of a consequence. The real objective was becoming much closer to customers. This perpetual licensing creates a transactional type of relationship, while in a subscription model, you have a continuous relationship with customers because you have the renewal, the expand motion. So the customer is always in relationship with you versus buying something a long time ago and then renewing maintenance from time to time. So it changes the whole conversation from closing a deal to really creating long-term customer value because that's what keeps customers with you. It sounds straightforward. The subscription has been there for a very long time, but it's really one of the hardest things to do in a company, in any company. And it's much more than just pricing, right? So when I talk about operating model transformation or business model transformation, when you look at it, your pricing changes, your product packaging changes, the way you forecast changes, revenue recognition changes substantially, compensation and incentives change, the way you think about customer success changes, support, everything, right? Even the way investors and the board look at the company changes dramatically. Every KPI that you look at to manage the business changes, And throughout the transformation, it usually changes to something worse before it gets better. And that's why it's a big shift. And leadership and conviction is so important in making it happen.
How did people react to this change from subscription to perpetual? Is it to change their comp plans? I'm sure it changed, revenue recognition you brought up.
Yeah, we changed a lot of things, right? Getting into the commercial organization. So originally, historically at Alplan, the team was organized around regional structures. So you had different countries with regional structures according to that company. And as the business grew and the company grew globally, that served us well, but also created inconsistent processes, right? So different forecasting methodologies, different customer experiences, depending on where you are. So we had to reorganize around global commercial functions, allowing us to standardize how we planned, how we forecasted the business and executed. And that led us to build new capabilities, right? So we built customer success, we built revenue operations, and essentially, what we wanted to do is to ensure that customers would experience one company, regardless of where they are, and have one consistent experience versus looking at separate departments. Thinking about resistance, right? Which I think is what you asked for. How did people look at it, right? Resistance is, from my experience, is very rational, right? So, and people don't resist transformation or change per se. What they resist is uncertainty. So, for example, if you take salespeople, right? In a perpetual world, we ask sellers to come up with large upfront transactions, like the big $1 million perpetual deal that sets up the whole quarter, that saves the quarter sometimes, right? And makes everybody a hero. And when you move to subscription, suddenly what you're telling them is, look, we want annual contracts. We want lower upfront ACV and longer customer lifetime value. And for a seller is like, so you're asking me to make less money. So definitely what you have to do there is you need to change the system and change the incentive system so that the behavior makes economic sense. And then when people understand that, change is much, much easier to achieve, right?
So when I went through a similar transformation from subscription or from perpetual to subscription elsewhere, we did a lot of calculations to try to figure out what's the equivalent perpetual versus annual. Curious, how did you arrive at that, and did you adjust the comp plans accordingly?
Yes, we made a lot of change there. First of all, we took time to prepare the transition, right? So you cannot just flip a switch. You don't, one day you go out and announce to the market that now we're a subscription business. So you're effectively managing both businesses at the same time, which is actually what makes it hard because you create this transformation, this catalyst to change, and everybody is really trying to move from one to another, but you still have let's call it the legacy business or the old business. And not all customers are ready to move at the same time. So you do need a hybrid model, right? So some customers, you start selling subscriptions to new customers, you start converting existing customers from perpetual to subscription. You need to create incentives for the sellers to do that, for customer success to help that happen, but also and more significantly to the market, right? So customers have to see the value of the new business model to be able to move. From an incentive standpoint, and before I go to incentives, what we did was we modeled a lot. So we did a lot of scenario modeling. We took the installed base and started looking at cohorts, understood creating migrating cohorts, who would move first, who would move last, understanding from customer size, customer spend, geography. We created offerings that enabled that change. And also for new customers, we had to come up with a different way of packaging our products and also different talk track, right? Much more based on value and lifetime and customer life cycle versus just feature function, which is what traditionally people were good at, right? This being a long-term engineering company, that's people were really anchoring on the features of the product.
Did you get more resistance from customers or more resistance from your internal folks?
Good question. I think we had pockets of it, but it was easier to get the internal team on board than customers because I think the reason for that is customers are much more and much more diverse, right? So there's cultural pockets, there's different businesses, and some customers are used to what they are, and it takes longer to explain them the value of changing kind of the way they interact with us and the business model. And with sellers, not so much because they're all subject to the same process, right? So things that we changed the incentive system, right, immediately, and we started rewarding subscription growth, multi-year commitments. Also, we created a specific area of the comp plan to reward maintenance to subscription conversion. We also gave more to new logo acquisition, right? So as a seller, you're like, okay, so I was working in this model where I had to sell perpetual licenses plus renewals plus expansions plus basically everything. We had a lot of people just essentially managing existing customers and just existing relationships. There's a lot of sellers that like to sell to new customers as well, right? That are logo like hunters. We have a lot of people that were more farmers, right? And the that led to also some of the changes that we did that I'll talk later on segmenting the sales force. But anchoring it to incentives and behavioral change, I think the change in the way we incentivize people was a very big and powerful lever to align them on the transformation.
I imagine, I know from experience that this issue of compensation is a challenge. Do you, because you have a perpetual license, which might be, say, I'll just use from round numbers, worth $1 million. You got an annual subscription worth, say, 50% of that, say 500,000. And then you have the possibility of getting a 3-year commitment to a subscription. Were you compensating on the multi-year subscription, or were you compensating only on the first year? I know this is an issue that many of our listeners are dealing with or have had to deal with. Curious how you tackled that challenge. Were you compensating on the whole lifetime value that they committed to, or I shouldn't say lifetime, the committed value, or just the annual first year value?
We started compensating on the committed value versus the first year value. And that was a conscious change because we really wanted to drive seller behavior and seller thinking to do that. And if you are telling people to go out and say, this is a 3-year deal, but you need to wait for your second year and your third year to get your commissions paid on the deal you did just now, it removes some of the incentive because sellers want to be paid upfront on the deal that they do. So we consciously did that in the beginning to really make sure that the change was real and we would get people on board. So that was a
And cash flow wise, were you getting the commitment from the customer up front, or was it paid out over time?
we're getting the commitment from the customer upfront.
So it makes it a lot easier to pay.
We were getting the commitment from the customer upfront. And what we did, we said, if you get the commitment from the customer upfront, we pay you upfront. If you get the commitment over time, we pay you over time, right? And that makes it both fair, but creates the incentive for people to go out and get upfront commitments.
That's great. Okay. So, all right. So take us on to the second transformation that you had to manage through there. What was the second?
The second one was when we started looking at how do we change the global organization, right? So we had these regional structures, and so for example, we had ALLPLAN in Germany, in France, in Italy, in the US, in different places, and they were pretty much organized around the specific region with the different functions. And we moved from that to global commercial functions. At the same time, so essentially we had a global sales organization, a global technical support organization, a global pre-sales organization instead of regional ones, right? And that was a big shift. At the same time, we also created new capability, right? So we created customer success, which was new, revenue operations, and these were not simply new departments. They really became strategic capabilities, right? Really important and needed to make the business more predictable and scalable, right? In the case of revenue operations, and then to orchestrate the customer experience when you're talking about customer success. And that was the kind of the big commercial model shift where we think that it was also the most risky because loyalties and culture was really tied around the region. And when you go to global functions, it creates some of that uncertainty that I was speaking before. And it took a lot of work and a lot of communication to have people understand the new model and embrace it.
So you went from a regional to a global model, if I have it correctly. And was the resistance there bigger internally or customers? I mean, customers now have new people to deal with. I imagine they go through that frequently. So, I mean, where was the biggest challenge there? Was it internally or with customers?
Not customers. For customers, I think it became we managed to deliver a better experience. because for a customer that, for example, comes across an escalation, or they want to understand training or best practices, they would, instead of getting the knowledge and the artifacts that exist in one region, they would essentially have access to the whole global outline, right? For the teams that provide support to customers, and for the teams that interact with customers, they also were able to rely much more and kind of leverage the power of the global organization, versus just relying on themselves and the two or three people around them, especially if you live in a smaller organization, right? In a smaller region. If you're in a bigger one, um, there's less of that impact, but still, a lot, because the power of global is much higher than just one region. So I think that worked well, both for our customers and internally, right? In the beginning, of course, there's resistance. I mean, I wouldn't call it resistance, but like, why are we doing this, and what's in it for me, and how does this impact my career path, and who am I going to report to now? Um, but we had a lot of positive experience of people going global, right? Because it also creates opportunity, right? There was many people in the organization that were managing a regional organization, and now they're managing a global organization for a specific industry or process, right? Or product, right? And it gave them the ability to work across the aisle, right? Work across regions, and that's very rewarding for most people.
And were you when you made this transition to global, were you able to do so without increasing headcount, or did you have to hire additional roles that didn't exist before?
No, we didn't. The change from regional to global did not change our headcount, but we did consciously increase our headcount on frontline sales, and I'll discuss that when we get into the kind of the sales model transformation, because we wanted to grow and accelerate growth, right? So we had like more boots in the ground, and also different roles, and we grew the organization like that for that reason.
And were you able to measure any productivity improvement as a result of the change from regional to global?
Yes, at many levels, right? And to be honest, what I'll say is, in some of the organizations, for example, technical support, we actually reduced the size of the organization when we went global, the technical support organization, and we took some of the technical support reps and used them to create the customer success organization, because we could leverage the knowledge, the customer knowledge, the product knowledge, repurpose them, and they were amazing at doing customer success job, right? So we managed to take care of technical support with less resources and create a new organization, dedicated to more to revenue, right, to expansions, to renewals, by leveraging resources that we had. So we repurposed that really well.
Yeah. So I'll take the opportunity here to remind folks that you don't. There's two ways to get productivity improvement. You can reduce headcount, or you can increase sales, increase output. And so you did a little bit of that as well, as I recall from our earlier conversation. You grew sales, yeah. So you had two things going on: repurposing of resources.
Repurposing and growing, right? So we ended up growing headcount by double digit overall, with a focus on frontline sales, and that takes me to the third interconnected transformation, so business, commercial, and the sales organization. And on the sales side, what we did was, and I kind of hinted to it already in the beginning of the call, we were organized in, we had one individual doing everything, right? You had like the garden variety sales rep, doing prospecting, discovery, closing, renewals, expansions, customer relationships, even escalations, as people do, right? In what we decided was, well, the two ways to make the sales organization more effective and more productive is, one, is increasing the number of boots in the ground and the headcount, but the other one is to go with specialization, right? So it's realistic to have one person do everything really well. And all of us who work in sales know that we're good at. Some people are better at prospecting and building pipeline and discovery calls. Others are really good closers. Others are good at managing customer relationships. So we took that and we created specialization. So we created an SDR, slash inside sales team, a global organization tied to regional organizations, but global, focused on building pipeline. We took the kind of the sales organization, the existing sales team, and we created a hunter team and a farmer team. We hired from the outside here to supplement, especially on the hunter side, because we were stronger on let's call it farmers, right? On people who are account managers and grow existing relationships. We created the customer success team that I alluded to before, mostly by repurposing technical support reps, but also some sales reps that moved to customer success, and that allowed every role to be much much more effective, right? Um, it also changed the way we talk to customers. So instead of leading with product, we started leading with business outcomes, and yeah, and that was the kind of the big sales model transformation, and it worked well. It worked really well.
Did people, anytime you make a change like that, you're going to move somebody from, having a number of opportunities to sell versus having only one type of opportunity to sell. Maybe they have a preference for that, but that does change their compensation, right? I mean, so what were the compensation issues that you must have hit some obstacles there, huh?
Yeah, so we created. So we took the transformation in steps, right? So when the whole transition to subscription started, we hadn't changed the sales organization. So it's something we did subsequently, but we did change the incentives. When we created a hunter organization, for example, and the SDR organization, we created a specific new logo acquisition compensation plan that targeted exactly that. And we gave the existing sales organization a choice, right? If you want to become a hunter, this is how the model looks like. This is how much you can get paid, and we made it attractive to recruit and to drive people who feel comfortable in hunting and going after that to become hunters. And we changed the farmer compensation plan to one that drives growing relationships. So we gave sellers a choice. We also hired from the outside people that were doing that, really well. And at the end of the day, we ended up with a balanced organization, right? I think the key here was to create different paths, right? And so people would understand that, you have more. If you want to manage customers, this is what you do. If you want to hunt, this is what you do. There were conversations around, for example, we had people with 700 customers, right? How can you manage effectively 700 customers? Do you even call the whole 700 in a year, right? Oh, I need them because, if not, I cannot. And why? Because, some of that was, the bigger my territory, the higher the probability that I have customers calling me, right? And you're right, and you're really basing you're working on a fulfillment function rather than a sales function. So we explained that to the teams, right? We showed them the required change in behavior, um, and we made it really attractive for them to go out and take on these new roles. And yeah, at the end of the day, it worked well.
And what percentage of the business was just really fulfillment as opposed to?
Good question. I mean, we didn't really have metrics on that. Like I cannot give you a real number, but gut feel was that also varying region by region. In regions where we had like a larger install base, there's more of that. In regions where we're just starting, there's a much more more of a hunting behavior because there's not a lot of install base out there to call. But in the regions where we had a long install base, I would say it was substantial, yes, fairly substantial.
That's a difficult transition. So you literally like took the company and shook it up, turned it upside down, and said, new game plan, folks. Here are your choices. What do you want to do? And you managed through it successfully.
Correct. Yes, there's choices. There was a lot of conversations, right? There's a lot of showing the opportunity, really, right? It's a new world. This is what we need to evolve to. This is why we need to evolve to that, and this is what's in it for you. And we really would like you, as kind of specifically account manager today, to become, for example, a an account executive and be a hunter, because we think you're going to be really successful, and here's some numbers to show you how much money you can make if you deliver versus what you do now.
Right.
Yeah, and that worked.
So you've been through three simultaneous, really substantial transformations successfully. If you were doing it again, what would you do differently?
I would say, look, I think that the luxury that we never have is time, right? So what I would do differently, what I would have liked to have, is more time to prepare, and then more time to manage the transition, right? And I think that the things that we can always do better is we need to communicate better, right? I cannot, overstate that. The more you communicate, even if it feels sometimes that you're saying the same thing, and people are, at a point in time, is, look, how much can you say the same thing until you bore people, right? But in this case, this is one of those where you've had behaviors that have been ingrained for a very long time, and even if you make rational arguments about why are we changing and what's in it for us as a company, what's in it for you, you need to do that, over and over and over. So the way you manage that communication is important. I would have communicated even more, I would say, looking back. The other thing is in communicating at different levels, right? So there's communicating to the masses and to groups of people. There's communicating to specific kind of individuals, and there's communicating to cohorts, right? A key aspect of making this work is working with sales leadership, right, and middle management, because the impact that those managers have on the overall organization is huge, right? So making sure that they are involved and committed, and really that there are no misunderstandings. It's really, really important. Yeah, and that's what I would do. I would do more of that, right, if I could.
Okay, so more time and better communication, right?
More time, better communication, and showing up, right? Showing up is really important. So being there, and being in front of people, being in front of customers as well, is tremendously important.
All right. Well, let's talk about you personally, Luis. You've lived in what, seven? You speak seven languages, is that right? And you're counting them, yeah. Lived in. You've been a world traveler. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? And tell us about your experience growing up.
Yeah, I was born in Portugal, born and raised. So, and I went to school in Portugal. I started working in Portugal. I worked there for the first 8 years of my career, working at Vodafone. Then I had the opportunity to move to Asia, with Vodafone, and I really spent the first 9 years with, marketing, product management, channel management, and I moved to Japan with Vodafone, to Tokyo, and that was the beginning of my international career. While in Japan, I moved to PTC, Boston company, where I live now, uh, right? And I spent around 15 years, yeah, in PTC, across professional services, customer success, cloud. Was in the cloud business for a while, and commercial leadership roles. And with PTC, I ended up being 10 years in Asia. So Japan, China, lived 5 years in China, five in Japan, working in Taiwan, Korea, had teams there. Then I moved to the Americas. I was in LATAM, Brazil, for a little over 3 years, in Sao Paulo, managing LATAM for PTC. A very rewarding experience. And then I ended up in Boston, in the US, where I am now. Throughout this time, so I built, enterprise commercial organizations in these places, different markets, different cultures, and that's been really great.
Yeah, and so did I have it right? Seven languages, was that right?
So I speak Portuguese, some native, English, fluent, Spanish. I speak French as well. Some German because of my last 4 years with Nemecek and ALLPLAN. So that's five. And then I do survival Japanese and
Did you survival Japanese? Okay, I have survival Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, which is I understand is very different from Portuguese Portuguese. Yeah,
it's not very different. It's just different accents, right?
a different accent. Yeah, it's like a Boston accent versus a Southern accent. Yeah.
But fully intelligible, right? It's easier for European Portuguese speakers to understand the Brazilian speakers. I mean, I wouldn't say it's easier. It's very easy. It's just normal. You understand everything. It's a little bit harder for Brazilian Portuguese speakers to understand European Portuguese speakers because we speak faster and we use different sounds, right? So the pronunciation and the accent makes it harder for them to understand, but it's the same language, right? It's like American and English and British English, yeah.
So talk to me about your early formative years. Are you become a chief revenue officer now, and you had came up through customer facing roles through Vodafone and PTC, and now at Allplan. And when you were, in your early formative years, was there like something that happened to you at some point, some kind of, seminal, epiphany you had about, what you were observing that was formative, then you can reflect back on and say, hey, that was a lesson I learned that I can take forward today.
Yeah. Um, it's interesting. I mean, looking back, your perspective changes a lot, right? So at the time when you're living in the moment, sometimes it's hard to recognize some of those moments. But I would say at Vodafone was an amazing school. All right, so I learned a lot about business acumen, governance. So a little bit of history. Vodafone acquired a Portuguese company called Telecel, which was one of the wireless carriers in Portugal, and it was a very dynamic carrier, young team. So looking back, I was very fortunate to start working virtually almost outside of college in an amazing, incredibly growing industry that was at that time really printing money, right, and growing tremendously with a very young team, new business practices that I just assumed was normal and regular. And once I left that environment, I understood that we were really advanced. Um, Organized, way ahead its time and its years. So it really gave me the foundation, plus a lot of opportunity, right? So I had the opportunity to do a lot of different things. I started on marketing, on market analysis. We did focus groups. I traveled to do focus groups with people with customers to understand if our products, how do they compare to the competition. We did deep analytics on kind of market studies and things like that. Then I managed products. I had a product management team, so totally different thing. P&L responsibility, really, working, being kind of the orchestrator of product success. So at that time, as a product manager, you had a product, for example, and you had a P&L for that product for the year. You had money that you would go out to, communications to spend that money so that customers would buy it. You would work with sales on incentives and commissions. You would work with channel. You would visit the channel. You would work with customers. You would work a lot with product to ask them, and with engineering to ask them what you would change and do all that. So very strong school at Vodafone. Then with PTC, I think the biggest thing was, so Vodafone, Portugal, then UK, let's call it Europe, different governance, right? All that. When I started working for an American company, it's a totally different way of looking at things, right? Much faster, working by the quarter, right? The quarter became the thing, right? You live and die by the quarter.
You didn't live and die by the quarter at Vodafone? Or I guess it was such recurring revenue that probably you could rely on it. That you probably did, you just didn't have the pressure because it wasn't as volatile.
Exactly. This was like subscription before subscriptions, right? It's mobile phones, wireless subscriptions, data, all that. So we worked on we didn't have anything to transition to, right? That was the business in the beginning, and we worked a little bit different. American company, much faster decision making, um, live and die by the quarter. I would say also because of the different business, it was also like a much more sharp sales mindset, especially at PTC. They're very strong sales school. A lot of emphasis in training sellers, in winning, right, and celebrating the wins, and so all of that comes with like a red-blooded, American sales culture, right? So I lived through all that, and then the amazing opportunity of doing all this in Asia, right? In the other side of the world, and working with the folks here in the US, and with my customers and my teams in China and Japan, right? In Korea and Taiwan. They're all different. They all think different. You know, doing like this bridge of cultures was something amazing, and that is something I was really fortunate and really grateful for.
And all right, so you must have had some mentors uh, at either or both places, and tell us about who were the formative mentors you worked with, and what did you learn from them?
Yeah. So I when I started working for Vodafone, I was reporting to the director of marketing at the time. Then there was a organization, and the company organized in B2B and B2C. So I was on the B2B side. I've always worked on B2B pretty much, and he was he was young. He was like 4 years younger than, 4 years older than me at the time. So but very, very dynamic.
He still is, I imagine.
Yeah, look, I was like 22, he was like 26, right? I mean, the CEO at the time was in his 30s, right? So it's a very young company, which also creates this, you know, no fear, let's do things, and the willingness to try new things. And the company itself was young, so I started working there in '96, and the company was founded in '92. And wireless technology was young, right? It was new. This was the first private um, wireless carrier in Portugal at that time, right? Together with the incumbent, which was a public company. So everything's new, and the this person, he was great. We're still friends. And he really helped me grow. He gave me a lot of opportunity. I think what I learned from him was focus, right, and taking the noise out of things, and kind of taking a complex problem and break it down into its kind of most basic components, and work through that to solve it, right? And also kind of relentless focus on solving in addressing real issues, right? And that continuous commitment to quality and excellence, and that's what I learned from him.
Right, and so I guess that brings us to the secret that we were saving for the end here. Uh, you had a secret to share with us about how to influence people and build commitment during periods of change. Did you learn that from this mentor or another mentor? And before you reveal the secret here, yeah.
I had two. I had him, and then I had another one at PTC. So the person that brought me to the company, we worked together over many years. He was running Asia, services at the time, and then he moved over to different businesses. We kept in touch. Then I ended up working with him later on at the club, but I worked with him for a very long time. And he's also about drive, uh, relentless drive. So he's really good at that, and kind of driving people and influencing people. And there are, I think what I learned from him is like these 5 things, right? If we boil it down to how you do it. So start with why. Why do we need to do something? Why do we need to do a transformation? Why do we need to go and visit this customer? Why, right? So why is really important. If people don't understand why change is necessary, they won't commit, right? So explain why, involve people early. So at the end of the people support what they help create. So bring them in so that they feel that, the solution, what we're doing is their own. Communicate relentlessly. So there's no such thing as over communication. Just continue saying, everything that you want to say. Transparency, right? And this is something that came across these two mentors and other people that I found through my journey, and it's something that is very close to me. There are setbacks along the way. Acknowledging them is a good thing, right? It builds credibility. Don't use, you know, a rose tinted lens all the time. Talking about issues, talking about problems, using the word problem is a good thing. I know this translates differently in different cultures. Europeans are very problem focused. Americans are more challenge and opportunity focused. But it's good to be transparent and talk about that, and leading by example, right? And I think this is critical, right? So people watch more than they listen, and being able to looking at you and to their own leadership and see people do what they say they're going to do, it's tremendously powerful.
Okay, so I wrote down 4 out of 5. I had, why change, involve people early, communicate better, transparency, and what was the fifth one?
Lead by example.
Lead by example. Of course, lead by example. You learned that from your mentors at both PTC and at Vodafone.
Yes.
Good lessons there. Okay, well, thanks, Luis. It's been great having you here. I'm sure that our listeners will appreciate this conversation, and I appreciate you joining us. Tell our listeners how they can reach you if they wanted to find you. What's your contact information?
Yeah, I mean, I can be reached by a phone. So American phone +1 617-901-8388. And also my email is luisbrito1@gmail.com. And of course via LinkedIn, my LinkedIn profile.
Luis Brito on LinkedIn. You can find Luis very easily. I know. That's great. Okay. Well, thank you again, Luis. Again, as I said, I'm sure our listeners will love this conversation, and I appreciate you being on the show, and I appreciate your joining us here today.
Thank you, Bill. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me, and very grateful to be here and share my experience. I'll be happy to come back anytime.
Great. Well, this brings us to the conclusion of another episode of Mastering Sales Leadership. I'll see you on the next one.
Mastering Sales Leadership podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.